has been a Google Summer of Code student developer, software engineering intern at QXF2, and Explorer Fellow at Major League Hacking. He is also a hackathon enthusiast. Last year, he was a project admin at GirlScript Summer of Code and mentored many of students to contribute to his project. Thanks a lot, Harsh, for accepting our invitation, and over to you now.
Cool. Let me start with sharing my screen. Just give me a minute, please. Let me start sharing it now. I hope my screen should be visible.
Yeah, it is.
So for any typos or any other mistakes, please pardon me. I just made all of these slides in the last 10 minutes. So it was like created in a blazing fast speed. So first of all, good evening, everyone, and I hope you all are having a great weekend. And thanks a lot for being a part of this session and being a part of this talk. And in this session, we will be discussing about open source and GirlScript Summer of Code specifically. And after we have covered all of these slides, we will be like opening this stage for Q&A. So the organizers might have a lot of questions. You all might have a lot of questions as well. And we will make sure that this whole session is focused on bringing variety of questions and all sort of doubts and confusions that you might have. So these slides are just for a quick reference, and we'll just go over them to basically understand what open source is, how you can get started in open source contribution, not just through the way of code, but also through documentation, evangelism, testing, and more of these, and how you can be an effective open source contributor based on my past experience contributing to open source. So a little bit about me. I'm currently working as a software development engineer intern at HackerRank. And I guess most of you are already aware about HackerRank. It's basically an HR tech platform that facilitates interviews between companies and candidates. You might have been aware about HackerRank community, but I basically work on HackerRank work. I have also been a software engineer at QuantSight, which is a data science consultancy where we pretty much work on open source projects. Last year, I did my Google Summer of Code at Metacall, which is a library that facilitates cross-language function call. And I have been a Google Season of Docs intern at Moja Global. Right now, I'm mentoring an Outreachy intern over there, and I'm also managing the overall community at Moja Global. So that's pretty much about me. If you wish to connect with me, you can drop me a connection request on LinkedIn, or maybe you can just check out my work on GitHub. And if you have any questions about anything around technical writing, software development, open source, or community development, you can just hit me up. Cool. So let us check out the agenda for today's talk. So we have a very flexible agenda, and I will really go through all of these slides very quick. I did not make a lot of them, obviously. So initially, we will just cover around what open source exactly is, and we will take some of the opinions from our audience around what their conception is about open source. We will also check out what are some of the most popular misconceptions and myths around open source, because a lot of people have different opinions, they have different definitions around open source and what it might be. And we will also try to uncover some of the myths. So it is not as fancy and it is not as beginner friendly as many people might think, but it is easy to like navigate around open source communities. Third, we are going to cover on how you can get started as a complete beginner with no prior experience. What are the different contribution streams? So just like I mentioned before, you cannot just contribute open source through code. You can also do that through various other means, by writing documentation, by evangelizing for the community, by doing testing, or by just being a member of that community. All sort of contributions are really appreciated. Lastly, we will check out some of the good practices, especially since most of you might be participating in GirlScript Summer of Code. So some of the things that I always request the participants to follow and the things that they should keep in mind while engaging with the maintainers and the mentors. And finally, we will cover what GirlScript Summer of Code is. I have been participating for past 2 years and I might be participating again this year. I just need to check out on what role I would be. And then we'll see like how you can easily get started with that. So the very first question, in like the very first agenda on our topic, what exactly is open source? So we have like over 130 plus participants here, and I would like really request any one of you or maybe two of you to like basically unmute yourself and speak up on what exactly they think open source is. It doesn't need to be correct. You just need to like voice your opinion here. So anyone can take the initiative and speak up. Come on, folks. There are over 135 plus members here.
It is about people who like can contribute.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very correct definition. Anyone else who would like to go?
It's about real life problems, like dealing not only with technical stuff, but also with real life problems, I feel.
So real life problems, like in this sense, can you give an example?
Real life problems like management skills or some skills we
Mhm.
need to develop, like in order to work in an organization effectively, not only the technical skills.
Definitely, yeah, that's quite correct. Anyone else who would like to go next? Okay, so let me just describe on what open source is. So let me just take a very quick example. How many of you have used Python here? Just a quick yes or no. Okay, everyone is raising their hands. Okay, I see most of you might have used Python. Let me just quickly see. Okay, more than 16 people have used Python. And how many of you are using Windows right now? I cannot be a Windows user because I'm using a Mac. But what about the rest of the folks? How many of you have used Windows? So I guess most of you have used both Python here and Windows as well. So let me just do a very quick question here. Let me show something to all of you. How many of you know this particular person? You can just quickly say yes or no, because he's one of the most influential person in the entire open source community that you can possibly think of. Anyone who's saying no? No. Okay. What about the rest of the folks? If anyone knows this person, like they can.
No.
No. Okay.
No.
No. Okay. Anyone who knows this person, like they can unmute themselves and they can speak up. Okay, so I'm really like not sure how many of you might know him, but let me just break the suspense. So this person is Mark Hammond, and if you're using Python and if you're using it on a Windows operating system, it is because of this person itself. So Mark has been working on Windows development for a very long time, like maybe for decades. And Python as a programming language was originally developed only for Unix-based operating systems. So it was like traditionally used by Linux distributions and all of that. And that was a very serious problem because Python as a language was originally developed to be general purpose. People who have no experience in programming, they can easily pick up using Python and they can start working on it. And by having Python limited to only Linux based and Unix based systems, it means that the Windows users would have like no chance of using and learning Python. So Mark Hammond came in. He had a lot of experience working with Windows APIs, and he started developing something that we call as PyWin32, which basically stands for Python for Windows extensions. And this literally allowed him to make sure that Python is compatible with the Windows operating system. And that was a very big revolution back at that time. So if today you're downloading the Python, ideally today, the integrated development learning environment, you will actually see a message from the Python Software Foundation saying like, thanks, Mark, for like building this project and making sure that we can run Python on the Windows OS. So coming back to my slide on what is exactly open source, almost every one of you gave correct answer. Open source simply means that the source code is publicly available. We are building on it without charging anything. We're enhancing the project. We are engaging with multiple contributors from all across the world. Like if I take so Matty is one of the authors of NumPy, and I guess most of you who are using Python here might have used NumPy. He's almost 70 years old. He has been like programming ever since, like even before I was born. So with the help of open source, you can actually collaborate and you can actually get in touch with the folks who have been like working on some critical software for a very long time. If you just like leave out projects like NumPy, PyTorch, TensorFlow, SkyPy, we cannot even think of the general purpose data science stack today. If you keep out projects like Vue, Angular, React, you cannot even think of web development right now. If you keep out some projects like Kubernetes, Docker, you cannot even think of the whole cloud native and the cloud-based technologies. So literally the entire 97% of the software development world is being powered by open source software. And this is the reason why it has gathered so much prominence. So if today you're working on open source, That basically shows that you not only know the code technical stuff, like how you can code or how you can contribute, you also get to learn a lot of soft skills as well, like technical communication, managing your tasks, making sure that you're collaborating effectively with the other authors. Sometimes your work might be written by like multiple different authors from all across the world. So this is exactly what open source exactly like is trying to do. It has changed the landscape of the whole software development for good and sometimes for the bad as well. Like I don't know how many of you have heard about it, but there was a recently a vulnerability that was related to Log4j. So Log4j is a logging library in Java, and due to that vulnerability, a lot of people basically face cybersecurity issues. And it was such a big thing back like a few weeks back that multiple news articles and multiple videos were put on it. But luckily, it was somehow fixed, and now companies are not facing that issue. So open source has a lot of deficiencies as well. Like the maintainers are not getting paid. Sometimes the authors are like completely working on it independently without any kind of support. But open source is completely built on volunteer effort. There are so many companies like Google, Microsoft, they're like trying to promote open source to make sure that the maintainers are actually compensated for the kind of work they're doing. But still, we have a very long way to go before open source is actually accepted as a kind of work in the mainstream. So, what are some of the misconceptions and myths around open source? Like everyone might be thinking that, hey, open source is this, open source is that. But is that exactly true? So, let me just ask another question. How many of you think that using open source software means that we are using it for free? You can just say yes or no. Like let us say that if we have an open source software, like let's say XYZ, it is completely open source, the code is open source, and does that give you the permission to like basically use it for free? What do you all think? Come on folks, anyone who thinks that open source is free software or anything else? Okay, Isha thinks that yes, it's a free software. Diksha also thinks that yes, it's a free software. Anyone who thinks like no, open source doesn't exactly mean that it's a
So
software? Yep.
it's not actually that much free. That we have to give our contribution also. If we expect something from it, so we also contribute in it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's quite true. So that's completely voluntary based as well. So let us say I'm working at a company and we are using a like a basically an open source project. I found a bug, and due to that bug, I'm not basically able to move forward with the development. So obviously, I might have to take out some time to go back to that library and start contributing to it, so that if that bug doesn't get fixed, I won't be able to like do my work as well. So that is quite true. But I'm talking more about the monetary compensation. How many of you think like open source is entirely free? You can just use any software for free itself. I guess most of you have said yes. So let me just do some myth busting here. How many have heard about this particular technology, AWS Amplify? Anyone who has heard about it? Like maybe just a quick yes would do. Okay, Ashwar has heard about it. Okay, a lot many folks. So for those who have not heard about Amplify is a serverless framework, just like what Firebase is. I guess most of you have heard about Firebase in some hackathon or in some YouTube video. So Amplify is completely like an AWS clone of Firebase itself, but with multiple other features as well. So if you check out the entire Amplify source code, it is literally present on GitHub. You can check out Amplify.js, you can check out Amplify CLI, you can check out the particular software development kits for Flutter, Android, iOS, and more. But does that mean that Amplify is free? It is not exactly possible, because if you go to amplify.aws and you go to their particular pricing page, you will actually see that if you are using Amplify, you have to basically pay this much for build, deploy, hosting, and all of that. So how exactly does open source projects are monetized? So in case of AWS, they basically had this internal code base. They made it open source, but they did not open source the infrastructure. So Amplify is supported by a lot of several AWS components, which is not open sourced. So even if you copy the entire source code, you try to make use of it, you can just go till the time you can actually make a contribution. But you cannot actually go ahead and you can like create your own version of Amplify. That is not technically possible. The same thing goes for like big projects. Like if you go to projects like TensorFlow or PyTorch or React, they are supported by the infrastructure provided by big tech companies like Google or Facebook. So even if you manage to copy the source code or manage to like clone it up, you exactly cannot use it unless and until you agree to the terms and condition. So there are various ways in which open source developers make money. So this was one of the way. You basically put your entire source code out in the open, but for enterprise support, you basically have to pay something back to the company. In another way, you basically start consulting on your product. Let us say you created a library. It slowly became a hit. Like there are various popular examples for that. Like one of the most popular example for this is Fast API. I'm not sure like how many of you have heard about it, but Fast API is one of the fastest Python backend frameworks out there. So it has literally got over 41,000 stars on GitHub right now, and it is used by hundreds and thousands of projects. So a lot of the people who actually have contributed to Fast API are now working as like heavily paid consultants for this particular technology. So if you get to work on any sort of open source project, you can actually use the skills that you have to start consulting for other companies. So some company might be interested in Fast API, they might be interested in like using that particular project for their internal use cases, and you can start like providing advices and guidance to them. That's another way like in which you can make money out of open source. You can also start evangelizing. You can also start like developing educational content for open source project. Like if you go to Geeks for Geeks or maybe like these data science publications on Medium, you will literally find there is a tutorial for NumPy, there's a tutorial for SymPy or SciPy. So you can start developing educational content, you can easily monetize it, and you can easily make money off open source. So open source is not exactly free. When you're contributing to open source, it doesn't exactly mean that you're a volunteer. A lot of the times you're just doing it for the sake of it. Like you want to get the hang of open source contribution, you want to learn from it. But on a professional level, there are multiple ways in which you can make money out of open source. You can just go ahead and start consulting on the projects that you have contributed to, or maybe you can start go ahead and like sell services on top of it. Everything is really all right. The second most popular misconception is about the open source programs. Obviously, Google Summer of Code, Outreachy, LFX mentorships, MLH fellowship, and more of them. So a lot of people think that, hey, we are contributing to open source, so we should only do that through these particular programs. A lot of people use these programs as a way to like skyrocket into the open source career. They're using it as a launch pad, not exactly as a goal. So if you're planning to contribute through these programs, it is completely all right. But also make sure that you are giving the best to the community and you're also sticking with it after this whole program gets over. So if you go and like talk with any particular GSOC or someone who has done Outreachy, you will certainly find that they have like still they're still like contributing to that organization that they were previously working with. So don't just limit yourself to any particular open source program if you want to get started with it. If you want to like learn from open source, if you want to make open source contributions, just go ahead and like start doing it for the sake of learning, for the sake of community, and also to make the world a better place. And after some time, you will obviously see the kind of the results that you got through the entire open source program. Like if I take my example, I was like working at Google Season of Docs last year, and some of my work was also demonstrated at United Nations through a series of workshops that we did in the climate change convention. So there are multiple ways in which like you can develop a personal brand out of open source. uh, these programs are one way, but you can still contribute to open source to make sure that you are learning the best, and you're also like getting to meet a lot of people from all across the world. So what are the ways in which you can get started as a beginner? So a lot of videos basically talk about Git, they talk about GitHub. These are some of the skills that you can easily learn in an hour or two. But getting started is simply a tough thing. Like if you go to any open source community, you might be obviously intimidated by checking out the entire code base. You will see that, hey, this code base spans over thousands of lines of code. How exactly am I going to understand it? I'm just like in my first or the second year of college. So in that case, it is not very necessary for you to contribute to an open source project just through the code. There are multiple different ways in which you can like make your mark in any open source project without actually writing any piece of code as well. So some of these things are like improving the documentation. So documentation is certainly the single source of truth that most of the developers actually use. So maybe like you can go ahead, you can start finding issues in the documentation, and you can start fixing those issues. Like literally, even a single typo correction will count as a contribution, and you will find yourself listed among all the contributors who have contributed to the project over the many years. Second is like you can easily like start reviewing and testing the code that is submitted by the other contributors. So if you go to any particular project right now, like let me just go to Fast API, you will see that it has 400 plus pull requests. And let me tell you that this is a very heavy burden on someone who is maintaining this project. So in our case, it is Sebastian who is like maintaining this. And he has got a team of maintainers and the rest of the contributors who actually go ahead and start reviewing the content. So if I just take up this particular pull request, like Ukrainian translation, I'm not sure like how many of you know Ukrainian here, but someone from Ukraine might be able to understand this, and they might be able to provide some sort of feedback based upon the pull request that has been submitted here. So you can go to files change, you can like check out the entire documentation that they have written. You can make some sense out of it, and if it all looks good to you, you can simply pass your feedback to the maintainer, saying that, hey, I already know some Ukrainian, I have read through the content, and it all looks good to me. So this will certainly create a lot less burden upon the maintainers while they're reviewing and testing the code and the documentation that is being submitted by the other contributors. So even like these kind of contributions are really, really appreciated. And you will like certainly gain a prominence in the community if you're trying to help out the maintainers in these ways. The fourth way is like evangelizing and collaborating with the new contributors. This is something that most of the times the maintainers do. Like they basically create a word of mouth for the community, for the project. They try to involve new people with the project itself so that they can go ahead and they can start contributing. And every single PR that is being submitted by one contributor basically inches them towards becoming a maintainer in the future. So they literally like are very supportive for new contributors and people like who are trying to involve with the project. But most of the time they have serious time bandwidth issues. They don't exactly have time to like dedicate to the rest of the contributors and to make sure that they're getting the right mentorship and the right guidance while contributing to that project. So in this case, you can step in as a community evangelist. You can start evangelizing for the community. You can like start speaking about the things that the new contributor should follow, like some beginner guides, some user-friendly documentation, some overview docs, so that the contributors can actually understand on how they can submit their code or submit their contributions and more of them. And you can start mentoring the other new contributors. Most of the time, the maintainers do that through some open source program like Google Summer of Code or Google Season of Docs or Outreachy. But open source is not just limited to these open source program. It is a constant thing, and you can simply get ahead and like start contributing to it with the help of these community evangelists. A lot of these companies like also have developer relations. In case of open source project, we basically call them open source developer advocates or open source evangelists, and you can easily connect with them and you can easily like get started with the whole contribution lifecycle by getting some help from their side. And lastly, I guess I missed the first point, which is about developing and coding new features. So obviously, if you want to upskill yourself as a software engineer, you want to like get some real experience by contributing to code, you can just go ahead, clone the code base, start reading the code base, make some changes, and start fixing out some bugs. Literally, like we have to make sure that we fix our first good bug before we start like creating new features and more of that. So you can easily study code base like using by multiple means. I think you can go through some pre-recorded tutorials around how you can easily navigate the code base, or you can try to apply like different techniques. Like my technique is by doing BFS and DFS. BFS stands for breadth first search, where I basically go to a project, I check out what their exact directory structure is. So like if I go over here, I can see the overall directory structure that is right here. Like I can see there is a flaky 8 file, which is for flaky configuration. There is a git ignore, which is for ignoring specific files. We have got contributing.md. It is basically the contributing document that I should be reading before I make any real contribution. We have got the pyproject.toml, which is a Python specific configuration for building the entire project. And then we have specific subdirectories here. We have got tests, which basically contains the entire test suite for our project. We have got scripts, which is like for some utils, for some automation stuff that we have kept right here. Like we have got builddocs.sh. This is for like building up a documentation and pushing it to some deployed site and more of that. We have got fast API, which contains the entire source code of this entire project. So it has got various files, various subdirectories, various configurations. So during BFS, just try to understand on what exactly does this directory do. So if in the future you need to make any sort of a documentation change, you know that by checking out .github or by checking out fast API or tests, you're not exactly going to get anything. So you can just go to docs, or maybe you can go to docs src because it contains the source code for all our docs. If you want to like make any changes to the GraphQL docs, you can just go to GraphQL, and there you will find the entire documentation for this particular section. So by understanding the whole project through a BFS, basically a breadth first search, you can just have a high level overview on how this project has been exactly structured. Once you have gone through the entire project, you understand the whole directory structure and everything. Now get into DFS, which is basically depth first search. So now go ahead, open each and every single file. Like let us say I want to understand on how logging is done. So you can go ahead and like you can open logger and you can see like what the code has been written here. If you want to like check out how routing is done, you can go ahead and like start checking out how this piece of code has been implemented. So it will take some time, which is pretty obvious. But after a specific duration, like you will start feeling more comfortable with the code base. So you can just go ahead, make a local branch, start testing out a few things. Like maybe just go ahead and like remove a piece of code that you think is redundant. And then you will see like what exactly is the code doing or how exactly it is behaving. So in that way, try to break around with the code base, try to mess around with it for some period of time. And this will obviously give you a lot of understanding around how this code base has been written. After all of this, like maybe you can go to the issues page. You can like check out what are the good first issues. Like let me check if they have any good first issue here. Yeah, here it is. So there are some good first issue here. Like there is this one issue that has been opened by uh, Puchan, and it is like API key header documentation. And I guess it has no updates on it ever since a very long period of time. Okay, 23 days back. So if you find that there are some good first issues and it has not been assigned to anyone else as of now, you can go ahead, you can request for an assignment, and you can try solving it. It is completely fine if your first pull request might come 1 month or 2 months or maybe 3 months after you join the community. A lot of people take months and even years to land their first contribution, and it is perfectly fine. Like if I go to my first contribution in one of my communities, you will find it like entirely stupid because it was just a one line change. But that one line change basically made sure that I get the necessary confidence and I get the necessary self esteem to make further contributions in the same community. So let me just go ahead and like try to show which contribution I'm talking about. I guess it was this one. Yeah. So I had this pull request created to Mojo Global, and that was like a year back. And I just removed this particular import because it was imported twice. And that was my first contribution in this community. So don't be like fret about the size of the code base or how intimidating it is. Sometimes a code base might have like hundreds of issues, hundreds of pull requests, but all you need to make sure is that you can simply reach out to the right people. Like in my case, it was Andrew, who is the TSA director of Moja Global, and you have like certain degree of mentorship and a certain degree of flexibility around what exactly you want to get started with. And once you have the right confidence, the right self-esteem, everything else will simply become quite seamless. So what are the different contribution streams? I guess I already discussed that. You can like start writing docs, you can start evangelizing for the community. Uh, so there are various programs through which you can start contributing on that means. Like if you want to get started with code, you can go with Google Summer of Code or maybe Outreach internships. If you want to go ahead with like documentation related stuff, we have got Google Season of Docs, we have got LFX mentorship. LFX mentorship is both towards code, documentation, and evangelism. You can also start pitching in your design principles. Like a lot of folks are into UI UX designing. So open source projects literally have a terrible user interface and user experience designing. So it is something that you can obviously pitch in from your end. You can like start creating wireframes for your project. You can start checking out like how you can make it further functional. Like if I talk about one of the projects that I'm maintaining right now, we are really looking for any front end designer who can come in and who can basically architect the entire front end interface for us. Like we have this design as of now, and as you might know, this one like looks very, very basic. So there are various ways in which you can like contribute to the open source projects, and it is just one of the ways in which you can do so. You can also like start testing out the code that has been submitted by the other contributors. And if you're someone like who is pretty beginner and you're like trying to contribute to the code itself, try to take a look whether you can start writing tests for that project. Like if I talk about my own project, we simply lack tests as of now. We don't have any unit testing, we don't have any integration testing, we don't have even any like end-to-end testing. So if tomorrow any contributor is submitting any piece of code, we simply have no means to check if that code is actually right or not without actually like pulling the code base on our own machine and checking it out manually. So by writing tests, you can easily get started. You can like get some really good insights into how the code base has been structured, how the logic has been written, and how you can test that logic. And you can also like add CI/CD pipelines, basically to deploy your code onto some server or to some container registry and all of these stuff. So a lot of contribution streams, basically, you just need to find your own way in which you can get started with all of these. And lastly, by contributing to open source, you really need to be a good open source citizen, because a lot of people basically flow into these communities saying that, hey, we want to do these and these and these stuff, but cannot exactly commit to like doing all of these at the same moment. So if you're a complete beginner, if you want to like get started with open source, just commit to one thing at a time. Don't overdo things, and be really vocal and communicate really well on what exactly you're trying to do. Second, don't really get into conflict with any fellow contributor, because this is something that I saw during my GSOC. A lot of contributors were basically getting into conflict with the other contributors, sometimes because of a single issue assignment, sometimes because of pull request, and all of these. So don't really get into conflict with any other contributor or even the maintainer, because the maintainers always see themselves as a benevolent dictator. They want to be the sole person who is dictating the whole project, who is controlling the whole project, but they also want to make sure that it is welcoming, and it has like got diverse set of contributors, not just from a specific section of the society or the gender or anything like that. So don't get into conflict with maintainers and the contributors. And lastly, pitch in your own ideas. So it doesn't mean that someone else has worked on that project, so their idea is the most supreme. Ask the right question. So if someone is saying like, hey, let's develop this feature, and they assign you the issue, make sure that you're asking the right questions. And if you think that your idea might be better, just be vocal about it. Just really write a really nice pitch around what you think it is good at and how you can further improve it. So by doing like these kind of stuff, you can actually make a very positive impact on the community. A lot of the open source contributors who have a lot of patience and a lot of enthusiasm, they basically end up becoming a maintainer in the future. So a lot of my friends are like maintaining very popular open source projects. Even I'm maintaining Mojo Global and Metacall projects. So it is a really good thing to do, because you're not only making the world a better place by maintaining these kind of projects, you're also helping the other contributors in getting started with their open source journey. So it's a really nice responsibility, but you also need to make sure that your own roots are really firm. So you already have a good understanding of what open source is and how exactly you can contribute to open source in the best possible way. And then you can simply go ahead like making more positive impact in the whole community. And lastly, we have got the GirlScript Summer of Code. So again, GirlScript Summer of Code, like this was one of my first open source programs that I participated in. So just to give a bit of my background, I come from a college where we don't exactly have any coding culture. So I literally came to know about GirlScript Summer of Code through one of my seniors. He had participated in GSOC 2019. So he literally told me like just go ahead and like participate in that. And at first, like I was pretty like dubious whether I should participate in this, because a lot of people have this notion that it's only for girls. So that's not the case. If you have like friends from other college, make sure that you ask them to at least participate in it, so that they can learn a bit about open source. Because this program not only tells you on what open source is, but it can also help you become a better engineer, a better student, and help you understand some of the soft skill aspect of contributing to open source, like being a better communicator by being a better pitcher or something like that. So right now, GirlScript Summer of Code is like a 3 months program for folks who are still like getting started with the whole open source journey, and it is completely like sponsored by GirlScript Foundation. So as it is evident, you can like go ahead and like check out the project. Okay, I don't think that they have put the project right now. You can check out the project on the LinkedIn page. So there are like a lot of projects that is being put forward by student developers like me and like others, and like you can simply get started with contributing to these projects and get connected with the maintainers, the mentors from different organizations, different companies, and more of that. So when I contributed, my mentors were from some really great places. Like one of my mentor was from Amazon, and right now like he's leading his own career hiring website. So through these kind of open source program, you can easily connect with the maintainers who are really at a good place, and they can really guide you very well around getting started with open source and the other aspects of student life. So make sure that you go ahead. I don't think the applications are really stringent. Like everyone who applies literally gets selected unless and until you are really keeping the application blank. And then you will get like 3 months of doing some really great stuff. And by like completing your projects well on time, you can actually like get a lot of like social branding as well. You can put forward a word about what kind of work did you do with during that project, how did you connect with the maintainers, what kind of contributions you made, and you can easily use that kind of pitch to like get some good internships at some really good companies and more of that. So I remember one of the interns like I worked with at HackerRank, her name is Adyasha Mohanty, and she was like one of the toppers in GirlScript Summer of Code back in 2020. So she's a year junior to me, but she's really talented and she's really passionate about the things she's doing. So she was a topper. She really like polish her front end development skills to a really great finish. And right now she's interning at HackerRank. So like this is just an example of the kind of things that you can do after you participate in this program. And if you're like really passionate about open source further, you can like maybe go ahead and like try applying to like different open source programs. Like we have got the Google Summer of Code, we have got Outreachy internships, and this is something like where I can basically help you a lot. So if you have any questions, or if you're planning to participate in any of these, just let me know. So this brings us to the end of the whole slides and everything. I guess it went for quite too long, but the stage is open for Q&A. And like if you have any questions, you want to ask something, or you want to clarify any of your doubts, you can go ahead right now.
So thanks a lot, Harsh, for being so brief about everything. So we had a number of questions in the form that we circulated, but many of them are crossed out now because you covered all of it in your PPT.
Yeah.
So we have a few could you, like, you are an explorer fellow at our MLH, so could you share your experience there? How was
Okay,
it?
so
And
yeah, so let me share my screen again. It was a mistake, like closing the screen share. Just give me a moment. So yeah, let's talk about MLH fellowship. So I'm not sure like how many of you have read how the whole journey of MLH fellowship has been, but I would certainly like ask everyone to like go through like what Mike Swift, who is basically the CEO of MLH fellowship, said about what MLH is and what exactly it is trying to do. So MLH it stands for Major League Hacking, and it is primarily a hackathon league itself, and it is trying to like organize workshops, hackathons, webinars, and more of these all across the world. So Mike Swift basically came up with this idea when COVID pandemic happened, that a lot of students have basically lost their student internships, uh, and due to this like whole facade, a lot of students are really looking for like different opportunities, like maybe some internships or co-op or something like that. So just give me a moment, please. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I was off for that phone call. Yeah. So Microsoft basically said that let's open this fellowship program, and it was initially focused only towards open source developers. So if you scroll down and you check out all of the tracks that we have, open source was the first track in the whole fellowship program. It was back during batch zero. I was a fellow during batch one, and we introduced multiple different tracks in that. So open source was the first track in that. Then we had the Explorer track, which is basically for students who wanted to do open source, sorry, wanted to do hackathon projects and more of that. So we really had like some cool, exciting prizes in that. But unfortunately, Explorer track is no more. Then we had the externship track where we used to like work with the US Department of Defense, banking companies, startups, and more of these. So right now, MLH has gone through a lot of changes in past 1 year. So we have only got these three programs, which is open source for open source developers, software engineering track where you basically work with companies, startups, and more. And then you have got the production engineering track where like you work with engineers from Facebook and some open source organization to understand on how exactly you can do production engineering at scale. So if you're interested in scalability, reliability, and like upscaling the whole mesh systems and everything, production engineering track might be for you. But if you're just passionate about open source contribution, you can just go with the open source track. For students who are not sure about committing to MLH fellowship, and sometimes it also gets very competitive, you can go for the MLH fellowship prep program. So compared to all of these three tracks, which basically goes for around 3 months, the prep track is just like a very simple preparation program for around a month. And you might like work on just a project with your co-fellows during a month of time. So like I have like heard from a lot of people that prep program is like much less intensive and much less competitive as well, and then it is easy to like get into these kind of programs through prep program. So you can easily consider on what exactly you want to go for. But if you're someone who is in their second or third year of engineering and who is still looking for internships or like maybe get some good experience on their resume, you can simply go and apply for MLH fellowships. Just keep in mind that it's really competitive, so you really need to be like at the top of your game. So some good projects, good communication skills, soft skills, and a good like social profile as well. So I hope that answers the question, Ishwari.
yeah, of course. Thank you for addressing MLH. It was a very common doubt that we had from many of the students.
Yeah,
So talking about GirlScript Summer of Code, like last year I had seen there were almost 100 plus projects in it.
yeah.
So how should one choose the right project to contribute?
So it completely depends upon the kind of projects that you want to do. Like if I talk about my own projects, I had three projects during the GSOC. One project was a very generic DS algo project. Anyone can just go ahead, they can make an issue, they can create one algorithm upon any popular algorithm or data structure, and they can contribute the code to it. But we really made that process stringent. Like code reviews were really intense. Like we had the most intense code reviews in any compared to any other project. Then we had another project called as Rotten Scripts. It was primarily for people like who are more interested in scripting, automation, and like doing some interesting stuff with programming. So a lot of people came up with interesting ideas. Like, what if we have a CLI that basically monitors the people who are unfollowing you on GitHub, or the people like who are like one common script which can wish everyone on LinkedIn, something like that. So people were really passionate about creating those scripts. They went ahead, they like made multiple pull requests, and they really came up with creative ideas. So it was primarily for people like who are interested more about automation, scripting, and like these kind of stuff in multiple different languages like Python, JavaScript, Golang, Rust, or more of them. Then we had a full stack project called as Speak It, and it was primarily towards developing a web application where speakers can create the profile and they can like have a public portfolio around the talks and the like speaking events that they have done in the past. So that was also a good project, and it was primarily for people who are more interested towards front end development, back end development, DevOps, and more of these. So if you're someone like who is a complete beginner, like you have not gone beyond learning the entire basics of a programming language or DS algo, you can like simply go ahead and like pick up a project that is more concerned towards that aspect. Every year GSOC has a project that is directly related to DS algo, so it is easy for you to like find these kind of projects over there. If you're someone like who is more interested towards like development aspect of things, GSOC is heavily dominated by these kind of projects. So there might be a project which might be around developing a web application or a mobile application or a CLI. So you can just go ahead and like you can easily find your interest over there. But on a very high level overview, it is also about the interest that basically drives you. A lot of people like have interest in towards a specific domain or a specific technology. Like you might see that there is a project related to backend development. One person might be doing it in Node.js, but the other person is doing it in Flask or Django. Automatically, if you're someone like who is more like interested in Python development, you will simply go towards that project itself, which is using Flask or Django. So, and lastly, it also depends upon the kind of points that you get. So GSSOC is heavily gamified. You basically get points for every PR that you're creating. And every organization has a different sense of what a good PR is. Like if I talk about my first project, which was a DS Algo project, we literally gave very less points for every PR, no matter how complex that algorithm is. So if someone is implementing a Dijkstra algorithm or a Bellman-Ford algorithm, we will just give them like a level 2 or a level 1 point. We never used to give them like level 3 points. But some other organization basically decided that, hey, if you're making a contribution, we will give you level 3. And automatically that created a conflict between the maintainers itself. So every maintainer say like, hey, this should not be happening. I think that this is a very basic contribution. This should not be given level 3. So automatically that basically creates a mess around the leaderboard and the final points table. But this should be the thing that you should not actually go forward with. Like if you think that you're doing really good work, you will automatically get the deserving points that like you should be getting. So don't think that, hey, these contributors from different projects are getting more points, so let's go to that project and start contributing to it. That's not exactly like what will happen. So an interesting case with me happened is like my contributors were like the top, like the table toppers in the entire GSOC. But in the last 2 weeks, some other project decided to give more points, and they simply like pushed us out of the leaderboard. So these things happen. These things are very interesting, and this is what brings the interest in life. So just find exactly what you are passionate about, what exactly you want to contribute to, and go ahead with your gut feelings. That's what I would say.
Okay, yeah, nicely explained. I remember Discord being heated up for the levels and everything. And
Yes.
just the fact, like I made my first PR in Neo Algo, and
Yeah.
that is how I started with open source.
Yes. Unfortunately, I'm no longer maintaining Neo Algo. So
Yeah, and the mentors and everything was really awesome.
yeah, we had a really nice team back at that time. So it was good.
Yeah. So moving on, could you tell us more about Google Summer of Code and specifically about how to prepare for the company proposals in GSOC?
Sure. So this time Google Summer of Code 2020 has been announced. So you can also like try to parallelly apply for both GirlScript Summer of Code and Google Summer of Code. One of my acquaintances, her name is Kajal Kumari. Like she's right now working as an ST at Expedia. She literally did the same thing back in 2020. She had applied for GirlScript Summer of Code and she also got into Google Summer of Code at the same time. So she might be able to better answer on how she balanced both of these together. But Google Summer of Code is much more stringent. The application is much more competitive. And obviously, it carries a very good stipend. 15 US dollars and 3,000 US dollars is no joke in a country like India. You can literally live like a queen or maybe a king for at least a few months with that kind of money. But again, like GSOC has got this specific hype due to the Google. So obviously, like Google is paying you for 3 months of work, and we really need to work hard. So there is this one common myth that is going on that we should like really get into Google Summer of Code, and after that, dekhte hain kya hoga, wo to ho hi jayega. But let me tell you the truth. Actually, passing Google Summer of Code is much more harder than getting into it because we are like working like very hard on our project and sometimes things don't work in our favor. So if you're planning to commit to Google Summer of Code, you need to be sure on what exact kind of work you are trying to do. So the very best thing that you can do as of now is to basically go to the past organizations, like the past programs, uh, find the previous organizations that had participated in 2021 or 2022, sorry, 2020. So let me just go for 2020 and like start finding the different organizations that participated. And now you can start focusing on the projects that you exactly want to do. Like, let me just take an example. Let us say that I want to work on something related to science and technology. So for science, we have got TARDIS, we have got Python Software Foundation, we have got Pecan, we have got INCF, we have got Orca Sound. So now you need to like decide upon what exactly your interests are. So if you're interested in Python scientific development, maybe you might be inclined towards num focus. If you're interested towards like biological development in Python, you might be more inclined towards NRNB. If you're more inclined towards like space exploration, space technology, you might go with aerospace research. If you're more inclined towards physics, particle physics, and all of that, we have also got CERN here. I guess most of you have heard about it. So there are tons of organizations in Google Summer of Code, and they have like a diverse set of topics. So go ahead and try to find that organization that basically creates an interest in you. Like I contributed to Metacall, but I'm not sure how many of you would be passionate about Metacall because Metacall solves an entirely different problem. We have got Liberspace here. Liberspace solves an entirely different problem. We have got CDLI. CDLI is basically working on ancient historical text. That solves an entirely different problem. So first find the organization that basically matches your interest and the whole overall passion itself. Once you find that organization, try to see on what kind of projects that they have. Like if I'm passionate about aerospace research, I can just go over here and I can check out their ideas list. So once the organizations are declared for Google Summer of Code 2022, we will actually get to see their ideas list. Like if I take an example, I'm right now making the ideas list for my organization because I will be mentoring and administering in my case. So you will see the ideas list here, and this will be basically the single source of truth around the kind of project that they want to have. So they might just give you a general information around what exactly their organization does, how someone can apply to it. So someone can be a GSOC student, someone can be a GSOC mentor, or someone can just provide a GSOC project. Like they can just pitch in their idea. If they find it good, they will basically start working on it, and then they can see like what are the different ideas here. So someone has like proposed these ideas, someone has proposed different ideas. So now you can easily see like what kind of project basically interests you, and you can get connected with the maintainers and the mentors to find out on how you can further start working on that project. So some of the projects might be pretty new, so you might be like working on it from very scratch, like a new repository, literally no code. This is what happened in my case. I was the one who architectured and basically created the whole project from scratch. But in multiple different cases, you might be working on an already built project, like maybe fixing some bugs over there, maybe adding new features to it. So in this case, having prior contributions to that organization will really help. And this is the reason why Google Summer of Code stresses so much on prior contributions. A lot of organizations basically have this requirement that unless and until you contribute to that organization, they might not consider you for the proposal phase. So make sure that you're giving your best out in the contribution time. And also make sure that you are fleshing out the ideas really well. Like if I see that this is an idea here, which is about orbit determination for continuous and sporadic signals. So it is giving you just a two-line introduction and the expected outcome, along with the who is the mentor, what is the code difficulty, what is the source of this. Now it is your responsibility to basically start fleshing out the idea. You can go ahead and like you can open this entire code base. You can see how it has been structured, how it is working. You can find the mentor here, which in case I think it is this particular person. You can get connected with him and you can start discussing on how you can further improve this project. So this is exactly how everyone literally starts. They need to flesh out the project ideas so that they can start working on their own proposals. Uh, Once they do that, they can start like contributing to this piece of code. They can start making changes to it. They can start making new contributions to it, and everything that you do is literally fine as long as it is towards a positive change. Once you do that, the proposal phase will open. You need to like start writing a proposal for that specific organization. So some folks like really write a very good proposal and they get selected on the basis of that. In multiple different cases, your past contributions is the biggest source of truth. So they don't really like get to see your proposal or anything like that. They basically use your past contributions as a benchmark to decide on whether it is like this person is good to do this job or not. So if you're someone like who is very like confused around what kind of proposal should I write, we actually have a very good backup for that. So we have something called as GSOC Proposals Archive, and this is something that we built last year. So all of the GSOCers basically built this organization, and we basically have this project over here. So you can easily go and you can easily check out all of the different proposals that we have in this case. So if you're someone like who is trying to contribute to KDE, you can just go to the KDE part. You can open someone's proposal, and you can see like how the whole proposal has been structured. So you will find like introduction, abstract, goals, implementation details. Uh, this person might have also added the kind of work that he has done previously, the timeline of the project. So what you will be doing each and every week of the project and more of that. Uh, there is also a pitch around why exactly this person should be considered, and it is like one of the most important parts of your proposal. So make sure that you're putting out the best of your case. So what kind of experience you have, what kind of internships or projects you have done, and what has been your past engagement level in the community. Make sure to add everything here so that it becomes a really nice pitch for your overall project. And if you're like putting something out in the proposal, make sure that you stick with it. A lot of people like basically oversell themselves in the entire proposal time, but during the actual coding period they just simply flatter out. And this is very embarrassing, not just for the community, for the mentor, but also for the mentee who is working on that project. A lot of my friends basically overdid on their proposals. They got selected, they were not able to commit to it, and they basically were like allowed to go after the first evaluation itself. So in simple words, they were basically failed out of Google Summer of Code. So make sure that you understand what you're exactly committing to, and you have like no other time commitment during this period, so that you can actually give out the best of your project. And once your project is complete, there are like multiple different ways in which you can continue being with the organization. You can actually get to be a maintainer for that particular project. You can start helping out other folks. You can start developing new features in that project. There are tons of options here.
Ronan, will you please mute yourself? Talking about Google Summer of Code, is there any ideal time that one should look forward to apply for it? Like GirlScript is something that even first year students can do,
Mhm.
but for Google Summer of Code, like, will you suggest an ideal time to apply?
The best time is right now. So a lot of the organizations have actually started putting out their proposals and the ideas. So if I just go to the GitHub and search for Google Summer of Code, you can actually get to go over the issues, and you can like easily start checking out the different ideas that the other organizations are discussing. So Scrape is like discussing their entire Google Summer of Code ideas here. uh, we have also got Tile, we have got Open Telemetry. So you can like go over here, you can like check out the entire things that they are discussing. One of the most fleshed out ideas was for fossology. I'm not exactly able to find it right now. Oh, yeah. Okay, so someone has actually made this contribution. So like they have added their entire project idea list over here. So you can easily like check out the different projects that fossology is preparing for this time. So the ideal time is right now. So just go ahead, start finding the different organizations that you would like to work with, and see their project ideas, what exactly they have over there, and reach out to the mentors like who can basically help you out in getting started with it. So literally like you need to be up on your heels. You like need to be like fast moving, fast paced if you're like actually planning to contribute to Google Summer of Code, because once the organizations are declared, it gets really competitive. We have like hundreds of people like working on the same kind of issue or same kind of stuff. So all you might need is like perseverance, patience, and a lot of enthusiasm to basically like stick around a single organization, a single project for around 2 to 3 months before you actually get selected. So just make sure that you give your best to it and start contributing from now on, because the more contributions you make, the better idea it would give the maintainer to exactly understand on what is your skill set. It is completely okay if you are a beginner. If you are a beginner, then the mentors will recalibrate their expectations from you. But don't try to like give them a false assumption that you're really good at what you exactly want to do if you are not already. So make sure that you're communicating really well and you're actually honest about the kind of skill set and the kind of experience that you have. I have a lot of friends like who basically did Google Summer of Code in the first or the second year, and they literally say that they were a complete beginner to the project and to the technology. And the maintainers were like really supportive to them for that part. So don't give any false assumptions. Don't like oversell yourself on the proposal. Make sure that you're honest with your words, and everything else would be really good.
Okay, okay. So I guess this covered most of the questions, but if anyone present in the meet has any questions, we can wait for a minute or two.
Sure.
So guys, you can unmute yourselves and ask it, or else put it in the chat box. Yes, Isha.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that this was a very insightful session. So I really thank you for sharing all this information with all of us.
My pleasure.
So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so do we have any questions? So I guess your presentation covered all of it.
Yeah. So if you have any more questions, like feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever medium you feel comfortable at, and I'll make sure that I answer that honestly. And if you're like participating in GirlScript Summer of Code, you might find me there, obviously.
Yeah, sure. So Shruti is asking, is the prep program for MLH also very competitive to get in?
Again, I'm not sure like how competitive it is right now. Back when I applied in 2020, we literally had 23,000 applications when I applied, and I was like one of the 120 during that batch. It was really competitive at that time. I'm not sure how competitive it is right now, but I've seen a lot of people who got into prep program advocate that maybe you should go for the prep program first if you have like some good projects in the hand before you actually go for the mainstream programs like open source or software engineering. So that would be my advice. Go for the prep program, have a really good project.